You are now listening to Tackling the World, a podcast designed to bridge the political divide by bringing people together to discuss important topics affecting our daily lives. Today, we discuss gun control, a very controversial topic with huge support for and against it. Our guest is Thomas Beskow, a senior in high school who has right leaning views. He will be sharing his perspective on gun control today. Hey, Thomas, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well myself. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, then let's just go ahead and dive into it. So,
Sounds
to
good.
start off, start off simple, could you just explain your stance on gun control?
Well, I think gun laws are ineffective generally. And I still think that they infringe on the Second Amendment. But
Mm-hmm.
that's about it, I guess.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into our second question here. So we're going to first talk about gun violence in our country. So, do you believe in any sort of gun regulation I mean anything at all to help control gun violence, or do you have some sort of other alternative?
Well, I think that definitely the issue is mental health. So if we were to
Uh-huh.
combat gun control, it'd be through like mental health programs. But I can see an argument with the background check, but personally, I'm against it. But I can see how some people might feel more comfortable having it. So,
Mm-hmm. So you would be fine if background checks became, are stayed the same or even expanded a little bit.
yeah, I mean, currently we don't have a national background check, so many states don't have to have them. So it kind of makes other states who have them like or their laws pointless almost.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I do think that it would, for like private dealings, having universal background checks would, I mean, completely shut that down. I mean, you wouldn't really be able to sell your guns anymore to like, I mean, you'd have to sell them back to the shop, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, especially with background checks, I feel like not necessarily sell them back to the shop, but before you can sell it to anybody, you would have to go through that process, through the government
Yeah.
before you can sell that gun to somebody. So the top 10 states with the most gun deaths per 100,000 people have some of the worst gun control legislation in the country. These top 10 states in order are Alaska, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Montana, Missouri, New Mexico, Arkansas, and South Carolina. Alaska, which is number one, has 23 deaths per 100,000. So, what is your take on this?
Well, I think 3 deaths per 100,000 is actually, or is that gun deaths?
Yep, that is gun deaths.
Do you know how that relates to the national average? I'm not.
No, I don't have that stat with me, but would you happen to know?
No, I don't. But I think the national average for like homicides in general is 6. But anyway, I think looking at each like state on a state by state basis might be a little bit, or I mean, like everywhere is different. You know, like different cities have different violent crime rates. Different states have like very different rates. I mean, you can see like different cities that have like 10 times more violent crime or murders compared to other cities per capita. So I
Of
think
course.
that
And mhm.
comparing them sometimes doesn't work exactly, but because or some of those states might have other issues that would cause gun violence. Or like
Of
a lot of
course.
those states are like have um, not very high education, just, or
Hmm.
like not a lot of college graduates, stuff like that, that might, or their economy that might affect things that uh, it might just be uh, that, or what am I trying to say? There could have been
Yeah. Mhm.
other things in the equation that caused that to happen, but
Of
I
course. I
do
mean,
think it's interesting that it happens, though.
yeah. I mean, I do agree with that. But the problem here is there's something underlying here that's pretty constant. These top 10 states are governed by mostly the Republican Party, which the Republican Party has views on less gun control in the United States,
Hmm.
and these states are overwhelmingly in support for the Republican Party. So, I mean, I think we see some sort of correlation here with the top 10 states all being red states and not even a single
Hmm.
blue state in the top 10. And we could keep going. And when I kept looking at it, it's not until I went past the halfway mark till we saw a blue state on there. So I feel like it's definitely important to point this out, the fact that states that are largely controlled by the Republican Party have the highest gun deaths per 100.
Yeah, that definitely. I mean, there could be outside factors or like that Republican states just in general have more violence. If you get what I'm saying, like outside of gun laws, maybe.
I mean,
I.
that's an argument you could make for. Sure, that's an argument you can make, but like literally every single state until past the halfway mark are all red states, which have the highest gun deaths per 100,000. You can't just say it's different for each state when you have
Mhm.
literally 25 states all being Republican having the most gun deaths, right?
What do you think about the like cities that have the most like gun deaths in them, all being like Democratic cities or even within Democratic states very
That's not
often?
true.
Or
It's not usually. Yes, I do agree that with that, and the only reason why is that you could go to a city that's mostly red, like Republican governed, but the
mhm.
problem you see there is that in cities you just have a higher crime rate. It's just true. It doesn't matter if it's a blue city or a red city. If you're
Okay.
in a big major city, you usually have higher rates of gun violence. And it just so happens that, the American population, when they're in a city, tends to vote to the left than to the right, which is why not most, if not all major cities in the United States are all left or blue leaning with, Democratic mayors and legislators.
Mhm. Why do you
So,
think
mhm.
Alaska has the highest uh, gun deaths per like 100,000 or whatever, or gun
um,
homicides? I'm not exactly sure what stat you brought up, but
they said, where I got the stat, it said gun deaths
oh, okay.
specifically.
Hmm.
um and I'm not sure why, like you were
Also,
saying, in Alaska it could be a result of some mental health issues or
definitely.
things like that, definitely. And I agree with that, but some people could point to the fact that if you were to just control guns and make sure they don't get into the hands of people who are mentally unstable in Alaska, you could definitely
Mhm.
decrease the amount of gun deaths per 100,000 in Alaska easily. It's definitely possible. It's just Republican, governors or legislators are not really on board with trying to do anything related to gun control because they don't because this is my personal belief, but they fear losing the support of NRA and basically their entire base, which mostly all love to have guns and definitely support
Mhm.
the Second Amendment to its fullest, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a good amount of guns are used in suicide, so the stats you could have brought up could have been, or like people definitely pick what they use based on what's available. So some of the states with
Mhm.
like the looser gun laws, that definitely could have been the case. So
Yeah, of course. States with looser gun laws, you could definitely have people coming into those states and buying those guns, which are probably legal in other states, right? It's definitely something there, and this all just comes back to preventing citizens from having these guns in the first place. I'm not saying all guns, but semi-automatic guns, for instance. If you, I know bump stocks are illegal in some places or probably in the whole country. I'm
yeah,
not
they are.
sure.
Yeah, federally illegal. Yeah,
Of
no one
course.
should have them. I guess according to the law
Yeah,
right
and those were legal, and in some and the shooter in Las Vegas used them. They He added that bump stock to his semi-automatic, and it basically made it into automatic weapon, being able to shoot
now.
much
Mhm.
faster, right? And that allowed him to kill more people, which is a terrible thing. So things like these keep popping up, and we constantly see that the Republican Party in general is not trying to step up and provide any sort of solution to it. Instead of because all they do is just support people in tweets, or give them their support, but they're not really doing anything else other than just words. Am I correct on that, you think?
Yeah, I definitely think they don't want to take a step in terms of law, or
Mm-hmm.
like that would definitely be the worst case scenario for them. They want to like try to avoid it as much as they can. I agree with that. I mean, I guess that's just their view on it,
It's all politics.
Yeah, yeah, it's politics.
If they want the support of the NRA and most of their base, they're going to need to, not say anything, and, just
Yeah.
take the silent route. And, it's politics, but some people would, prefer that politicians put the politics aside and focus on the humanity and all of it. And according to the Second Amendment, right? Everybody likes to point to Second Amendment, saying that it's a right to bear arms, and it's true. You have the right to bear arms. It's in the bill. It's in the Second Amendment, right?
Mhm.
But the Second Amendment says that a well regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It says a
Mhm.
well regulated militia. And to anybody, that probably means, the regulation of guns. So gun control, right? I mean, the Second Amendment itself says a well-regulated militia. So don't you think that, the government should be, having federally instated gun control?
Hold on, I just had to look up the Second Amendment exactly so I could read it,
Yeah, for sure. Go
or
ahead.
read it in front of me. But,
Mm-hmm.
well, I think it says a well-regulated militia be necessary to the security of a free state, comma,
Mm-hmm.
the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Yeah.
Hmm. I don't know. I mean, it
Well,
kind of depends on how you interpret or like regulated militia. That could just mean like
yeah.
they have a lot of like, I don't know, like the militia is well organized, stuff like that. I don't think that necessarily
Yeah, and
means or connects to the right to keep and
mhm.
bear arms.
The way that I interpret this amendment is that, it says that the government is in charge of regulating the militia, so people, because back then the militia was, community, basically, like armies, right? Because the community itself would protect itself. There wasn't much of a police department or things like that, just the military. And, usually citizens would, purchase weaponry, and they would protect their own communities. So that's a well-regulated militia, meaning the government has power to regulate them, right? And in modern times, what kind of guns that they can purchase, right? But they should never not be able to purchase any a gun, meaning that you can regulate what kind of guns, but you cannot outright ban owning firearms. So that's the way that I
What
interpret the Second Amendment.
What do you think about the guns that are banned? And also,
um
if
mhm.
the point of the Second Amendment is to protect against the government, or I mean, I think most people agree that's what the founding fathers wanted to do. Why would they let the government decide what laws they can have, or like why would they let the
Because
government
mhm.
regulate them if they have the law in order to protect themselves from them?
Yep, because the whole point of the government, you see, with the checks and balances, when they started this country, everybody worked hard and they had a belief that they could make this into something new. It was an experiment of democracy. And so
Yeah,
far they've been succeeding, right? And people have that belief that because of the checks and balances in place, the government won't become something like Britain, won't become a monarchy, for instance,
well,
as
the
some
founding
people
fathers
were
didn't think
afraid.
that. I think they were all.
Mhm.
I think they were generally worried that the government would become tyrannical, right?
Of course, yes, but they also knew that the point of a government is to control its population, right? To provide safety, to provide necessary things for its population to thrive. And when we're talking about safety, a well-regulated militia means, being able to control the public's use of firearms to just keep them safe from themselves. I mean, the whole point of starting a government, right, is to provide necessary things and keep the population safe. I mean, or else they wouldn't have a government. They would just say,
Mhm.
everybody off to themselves. This is America, freedom. You can do whatever you want. We don't have any sort of overreaching government or monarchy. but they obviously decided to create a government for a reason, right? I mean, it's pretty
Yeah,
obvious.
there'd be chaos probably without it. So,
Of course, and so the not only the founding fathers, but all these states that decided to become a part of the United States, and all of the citizens who voted and who supported this knew, right? They knew that we needed a government to keep the population under control and to keep us structured, right? That's the whole point. And
mhm.
with structure comes compromises, right? In some areas with laws, and stuff like that happens, and they knew it. So I don't think it would be, I mean, that's why I don't agree with your point when you say that people don't want or didn't expect like a tyrannic government again. Obviously they didn't expect that, but they did expect a government to provide them safety and provide them necessary things to function as a society.
Or you said that you don't agree with what statement exactly? Or
I
the one that
don't
I said that people
Mhm.
thought the government would become tyrannical, or
Yeah, I mean, no, no,
so you
no,
didn't
not
think
no,
that
no,
the
no,
people
no,
would become tyrannical, or
no, no,
you
no,
didn't think
not
that
that.
people thought the government may?
No, no, no. Sorry, I kind of forgot what you said. I was trying to piece together something, but it kind of fell out of my
Oh,
words.
okay,
Sorry about that. But
that's all right.
it was basically about the point of you saying that the whole reason why people decided to break away from the United Kingdom or Great Britain was to get away from a tyrannical government, right? Just with
Um,
one person in power.
I don't think that's why we broke away necessarily. I mean, that's a pretty complicated topic, but
Yeah, it
I
is.
think it's definitely a reason why we put in the Second Amendment. I think it's because
Mhm.
we're worried about that happening again.
Yes, we are worried about that happening again. And my point was that yes, we are worried about that happening again, but we
Hmm.
also realize that we need a government in place to regulate what citizens do.
Yeah.
Because people then were also smart enough to know that if you just let a bunch of people loose, it's not going to work out well for a country. You don't necessarily have a country. You only have a country with structure.
And I
Yep.
think what were so about the like banning guns, do you think that they should be able to be banned, or do you just think that there should be regulations to be put on them, or
I mean, you
what?
can't ban them. I mean, the Second Amendment clearly states everybody has the right to keep and bear arms, and that shall not be infringed. But I agree with the fact that firearms should be regulated.
Oh,
Especially the
okay.
type that you can get. I mean, let me ask you a question. So, what type of firearms do you think us, citizens should be able to purchase?
Well, like I said before, I don't think there should be any restrictions. So I think they should be able to buy whatever gun they'd like. But I
So,
think
you
I
think you would be fine with somebody buying an automatic firearm? I mean, what's the point of that? Why would anybody
well,
need to buy
so
an automatic firearm?
actually, so right now, it's not actually like very difficult to modify a gun to make it fully automatic. Like you buy like a kit online.
Hmm.
So like I think stuff like that, like I personally wouldn't want one, or like it's I just think that people will go around it,
Hmm.
and I think that any infringement makes it like if you say like, oh, this one thing is okay, I think that makes everything okay, you know. So I guess that would kind of go against uh, my logic with the Second Amendment if I said that we should have gun laws. If I now say, oh, it's okay if we ban one, you know. So
So I'm a strong believer in that laws that were created in the past, right,
mhm.
should be elevated or should be changed to fit the modern needs. Of course, I mean, I'm sure everybody would believe that.
Yeah, society changes a lot,
Society
definitely.
changes a lot, and laws should change with society. And sometimes that is not, sometimes that doesn't work because of the politics and the government procedures we have in place. It becomes very difficult to do so. And when I look at gun control, I mean, sure, you may believe strongly in the Second Amendment, which for sure you do. You believe that nobody should be able to regulate guns. But when you
Hmm.
think about it in a common sense standpoint, right, in an emotional, in a humanitarian way, right, banning
Yeah.
banning certain types of guns should be okay. I don't see why you would need an automatic, weapon. I mean, why would anybody need those? I mean, sure, somebody could say, "Oh, I just want to buy it," but we don't know what you might do with that, and there if and there is no, and if there isn't restrictions or regulation in place set by the government, I mean, you never know what could happen. I mean, to be fairly honest with you, if we were to the next day just repeal all types of gun control and allow society go back to pay, buying whatever guns they want, I feel like in a
Mhm.
year's time, I mean, gun violence is going to go up so much. I mean, school shootings, I mean, public shootings, I mean, just gun deaths, suicides, homicides in general will just all skyrocket because people are now, because certain people are not able to get guns that they could not before. And if you're talking about no gun regulation, which you strongly believe in, that means no mental checks, right? That means no test, no exam to pass in order to make sure you're responsible to use a firearm. With things like that, I mean, the country could go into chaos.
Well, yeah, I think, I mean, even right now in a lot of states, you don't have to have a background check, or if you go through the gun show loophole, or if you buy it privately, you don't.
Uh-huh.
So I think that already we still have that going, or like you said that there would be like a huge like jump in like gun violence, but a lot of those things with like background checks are already not happening. And I'd say also a lot of the, I mean, like for most people, like fully automatic guns might not be, or like even as dangerous as a semi-automatic one in some scenarios.
and
But
and I mean, I just want to say, I mean, you pointed out the fact that there are no background checks already in some states.
yeah,
And I feel like it's important to realize that the reason why these states that I mentioned, the top 10 especially, I mean, I don't know if some of them might not have any gun control laws, but the reason why, I mean,
they,
one of the reasons why is probably because they don't have any background checks, if one of those states don't have any, you know what I mean?
well, I think most like gun shops that you go into have background checks, but if you just
Hmm.
buy it privately, then they're, I mean, like a random person can't do a background check on you. So, or just a
Definitely.
person sitting at a um, like selling guns or whatever that it's not doesn't normally do it or something like that.
Definitely. So
So
do you think it's important to have background checks even on private sales?
I think it would definitely that would also be an infringement, but I can see how that would make people comfortable because I know a lot of people are worried about just anyone going out and buying a gun. But personally, I do think that's an infringement. But if that was the case, there were universal background checks, I wouldn't necessarily be mad about it. But
Hmm. If you
um,
wouldn't necessarily be mad about it, your only other issue with it is the fact that it's infringing on your rights, right?
yes, I
Hmm.
personally, I don't think it would affect me much. I don't think, I mean, maybe I'd have to like wait a day, if I don't think it would be too much of a deal, but uh, I do think that like if any regulation is okay, that makes all regulation okay, or it pretty much changes the meaning of the Second Amendment. I mean, like right now we're at the point where we're saying, okay, it is okay to regulate it. Like that's how we're interpreting it. That's how the Supreme Court is currently interpreting it.
Hmm.
So I think if we continue that interpretation, we might, I don't know, we might not even have them in the future or end up being like the UK or Australia,
I
where
mean,
they completely banned like semi-automatic guns.
see, I don't think that will ever happen in the United States. And the reason why
Okay,
I
I
say
don't. I
that,
personally don't think it'll ever happen either.
yeah,
But
I mean, I don't think it'll happen because it's literally in our constitution. And the only way you can change our constitution is to get support of two-thirds of the two-third. It has to pass through the House, Senate, then it has to be accepted by two-thirds of all states. I mean, there's so many like you know checkpoints to get through before you can do that. I don't think it will have ever happen. So I don't feel like any of us should be worried about it becoming Australia or the United Kingdom, because guns will still be legal. It'll just be regulated. Now, if you were talking with somebody who's a hardcore gun control, right? um in what places are you willing to meet in the middle? So you said you would be fine with universal background checks. Is there anything else
yeah.
that you would be fine with?
I think possibly taking like a test or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Even like going further into like looking into their mental health,
Uh-huh.
stuff like that. I'd be okay agreeing on, or like going in, or yeah,
Mm-hmm.
agreeing or compromising with.
And just for the listeners to know, Japan, the country actually, if people want to own a gun, they must attend an all day class. They must pass a written test and they must achieve at least 95% accuracy during a shooting range test. They must also retake this test every 3 years. And so that's what I was kind of referring to, and that's what I guess Thomas agrees with, is having some sort of test. And would you be okay with like a shooting range test and maybe having to retake the test every so often?
I don't necessarily think accuracy is like too important. But I do think knowing how to handle a gun and like knowing not to like aim it at people and just being like safe in general and not like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think like a few weeks ago or something like that, someone like pointed, like they took out the clip of a gun and they pointed it at someone, like someone famous, I think like a pro football player or something.
Uh-huh.
His like wife pointed a gun at him and she didn't even know it was loaded because she thought she took the clip out of it. And I just think stuff like that people could definitely be educated on to possibly reduce
Of course.
violence, and possibly even in like school, like so like kids, I don't know, so
Mm-hmm.
like not like that we'd teach them how to shoot, but we'd teach them like about gun safety, maybe
Yeah, I
stuff like
mean,
that.
yeah, that's definitely something important, right? Teaching, children whose parents might own guns, learning, the
Yeah,
safety of guns, definitely, I agree with that. And
and
go ahead.
or also talking to possibly like parents of children who own guns, or just being like, hey, make sure you're like you have it like locked up and stuff like that, or
Mm-hmm.
I think that would definitely possibly keep people safe.
Because I'm sure if we educate children on this as well, you'll find a sense of accountability within the household. I mean, if their
Hmm.
father or mother actually leaves a gun out, you might have the child go up and tell their parents to put away the gun because they taught us at school that you can't keep guns out. So there's like a sense of like accountability that comes in when you teach children, because they're able to bring that back to their household and possibly even educate their own parents on it, which is
Yeah,
which
definitely.
is important. So do you think that a test to make sure they still have that knowledge is required every 3 years, or every 5 years, whatever it might be, just to make sure that they're still responsible?
I I'd be more worried about it originally at the like a mental health standpoint,
Uh huh.
but I could definitely see where in a few years, if people like change a lot, like in terms of mental health wise, but I don't think they need to be like retested on like gun like
Safety, because
knowledge or like safety. I don't think safety needs to be retested, but possibly
gun
just like
knowledge.
looking in and seeing like, hey, are they doing all right? That could possibly be, not that I would want that to happen, but that's something that I would compromise on,
Because there
or
are
just checking in.
new changes to gun laws every year almost, and there are also new improvements to guns, like add-ons, things like that. There's always something new coming up, and I feel like if
3D
we were able
printing,
to, yeah, I mean 3D printing to print extra
that'd be
parts,
big.
right?
Yeah.
So like it's like education on new 3D printed parts, and the safety of things like that. Because every 5-10 years something new happens, and I feel like for people to come back and get re-educated on the new things, right? To get educated on something new, right, about gun safety, and then being able to go back home knowing that all of the new gun safety rules, laws, regulations, and that that you are safe, and that you're well educated. I feel like that's something that will help gun owners, but it also helps people who don't own guns, because then they know for a fact that their neighbor or somebody across the street has the required knowledge and are responsible to own guns,
Hmm.
for sure. And um I want to move on to something different, something with law enforcement and community. Some countries in Norway have emphasized a social trust between law enforcement and citizens of a community. The community and law enforcement work together to develop community policing. This model allows for police to have a better understanding of their community and stop threats before they happen. So basically, it's like meeting up once or twice a year with the community, maybe holding like some sort of, event or something, meeting people, talking with them, growing a relationship with law enforcement. And it's something sort of like what we do with neighborhood watches, right? Where people
Mhm.
go out and, they keep the community safe. Would you be interested in something like this? Would you think something like this would be okay?
I definitely wouldn't be opposed to it. I think like building like relationships with like the community could definitely help like reduce violence and just I don't know bring like a better atmosphere overall. But
Uh huh.
it I could or it might not work like super well at controlling gun violence, but it could definitely be a strategy that we use to
Hmm.
try. I think anything we could do to try would be beneficial.
And so what what are your thoughts on the gun show loophole?
So I think it's basically like just private dealers all in like one room, all selling together. So it's kind of, I mean, it's pretty much like a gun store, except you don't have to have any background checks. So,
Mm-hmm.
like what I said with no infringements, this kind of, I guess I would personally, I'm fine with it. But definitely, if you live in a country or if you live in a state like California with strict gun laws, and you're like, well, I don't want people being able to go over there and just buy one, I can see how people could be mad about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I wouldn't necessarily disagree with it. But it is definitely a loophole for people who are possibly have mental health issues right now. So
Mm-hmm. And definitely, I see a lot of conservatives, especially saying that, democratic states, they actually have more gun violence. The more regulation you have, the more gun violence. Someone they want to point out is, Ben Shapiro. You probably heard of him. He likes to
yeah.
point out a lot that places that are more regulated, with more regulated gun control, have higher rates of gun violence and gun death. Do you
Mhm.
and why do you think, if I don't believe this is true? I mean, everything that I've read online, and I am bipartisan when I'm doing my research, and everything that I've looked at has all indicated that, red states with, the least amount of gun control always have higher gun violence and gun deaths, right? So
Yeah.
why, so if you do believe what Ben Shapiro believes, why do you think that happens?
Well, I think that possibly you guys have been looking at like different studies, maybe, or I'd have to like look at them, I guess, to like look at the actual numbers. I wasn't like I know that you talked about it before, like the order of like how there's a lot, how it seems very. Are you what you were saying before made it seem like there was a strong correlation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to see it for myself, I guess, to understand what kind of correlation you and Ben are seeing. So,
Yeah, for
but I'm
sure.
not.
I mean,
I'd say
after
definitely
today,
different
I yeah. I mean, sorry. Go ahead.
or yeah, definitely like comparing different areas is very like difficult because there are definitely some countries in the world that have very strict gun laws and
Uh
very
huh.
high gun violence. So it's, I mean, you never really know what you're going to get, or it could be the other way around, or just depending on the area. No matter the gun laws, sometimes there'll be gun violence.
hmm
Uh,
And at the
but
end of
yeah,
this, I'll be glad to show you my sources.
okay, cool.
I've also sent them to you, so I can show you which link exactly, so you can go ahead and see those as well, see those statistics for yourself.
Sounds good.
Awesome. So now just to move on, let's talk about illegal gun purchases. So, let's just imagine a scenario for now, right? So let's just imagine a scenario where we have a country with, gun control all over the all over the country. It's federally instated gun control, and it bans some types of guns, and it's constantly regulated every single year, right?
Mhm.
To keep people safe. And let's just say that we have high transactions of illegal weaponry. And that's something people like to point out, right? When you have something super regulated or something is banned, a black market appears for that specific product or that category. And that's true. If that were the case, do you have any insight into how you could stop black market transactions?
Um, I mean, hmm, I would say it'd be kind of difficult
Mm-hmm.
to. I mean, I know the ATF right now they don't really like arrest many people for like illegally selling guns. They're actually, I think there's only like 2,000 members of the ATF, and I think that's similar to like the police department of like Washington D.C. or something like that. So they're not actually like a huge organization, so they don't have a lot of like, or I don't know, they don't have a ton of resources to stop a lot of the illegal gun selling, and they don't have a lot of like evidence or like to find people, I guess. So I could possibly see it being pretty difficult, but for a country, I think stopping or looking at like their imports very carefully could definitely be a way to do that, or monitoring what comes into the country
Mm-hmm.
would be a good way possibly to stop that illegal um, gun trade, I guess. But for the
So,
U.S., I don't think that would exactly work because we'd have guns coming in from or like our own country that are being made illegally, and guns coming from out of the world or other countries illegally too.
would you be in favor of a federal organization that's probably not, meaning it's like a separate organization under the federal government, but not directly controlled by the federal government? Meaning the positions, high positions are appointed. Would you be in favor of some sort of organization under the federal government apart from the ATF that sole purpose is to, stop, illegal gun transactions and, be on the constant lookout around the country for any of any gun criminal activity going on? Would you be in favor of something like that?
I personally wouldn't be in favor of it, but I think possibly if your goal is to reduce the amount of illegal, like I said before, I don't think there should be any restrictions. So I don't think like there should be like illegal gun selling should even be a thing, in my opinion.
Uh-huh.
But if your goal was to reduce the amount of illegal guns in the market, definitely increasing like the size of like the ATF or a new organization would be the way to go, I guess. But I mean, personally, I wouldn't be happy. But if
Mm-hmm.
that's your goal, then I could see that happening.
As we're talking, I've noticed that you really stick with the Second Amendment, but you're willing to come up with these compromises. Now, my question is, if you're willing to compromise, I know for a fact that if you're going to compromise on something, that will have a good effect, right? A good effect, a good change in guns, right? So don't you
Oh,
think that, if you're willing to compromise on these many areas, that you should also be willing for, law changes, right? To this, probably to the Second Amendment, right? To make sure that, guns are still a part of American society, but allowing, making it clear that, regulation is required to make sure that, you know, people are safe from, weaponry, right? I mean, wouldn't you? Because I see you on either side. I mean, I see you supporting the Second Amendment a lot, but I also see you, compromising and saying you would be okay with this, but then you go back to saying that, but it would, break my views. Don't you think that you should probably update your views if you think, if you're willing to make all these compromises?
well, I think that a lot of the like options that I'm bringing up, generally like the cons of them aren't very big,
Mm-hmm.
or they're like the con of like a background check would be, having to get a background check, or maybe not being able to buy at a privately, which is not too big of a deal for me, but and I think I would be compromising more to make other people happy, not necessarily for me. And I could possibly see how they may work and help, like so crazy people can't get guns, but I don't know for a fact that it would be a huge difference because I do think that people would still be able to buy them online, and even if they are crazy, just buy them from someone and not let anyone know.
I
So
mean,
I
the federal government could probably, I mean, ban online gun transactions. And even if you are going to buy a gun online, and gun transactions online are banned, I mean, if you want to buy a gun online, it needs to be shipped to your house. And I'm sure when it's being shipped, it'll be scanned and checked to see if there's a gun in it or not. And there's easy fixes for that, right?
I'm not exactly sure like what scanning goes on, but I do know that like a lot of guns come out of the US being bought online. I mean, we make a lot here, so it definitely makes
Yeah.
sense. And we have a lot of guns here, and a lot of people are willing to sell them. So I know in Europe, they often, I mean, like Glocks are like, they like the price gets doubled, but they get sold online still. And I think they use like cryptocurrency and the dark web and stuff like that. So the government, even though it is banned, like they shouldn't be owning it, it still happens.
Hmm.
And I think that is something that like probably online gun selling is probably what the ATF is able to track the easiest, even though it is already difficult.
Hmm. So, finally, just I want to focus on one more specific topic, and then a couple more questions, and I think we'll be off for today. um let's talk about gun suicide in the United States. It's definitely a huge problem. There are 36,383 people who die from guns, from gun suicides every year, and approximately 61% of that 36,000 are through suicide by gun. Now, after hearing these statistics, don't you think stricter gun laws would have saved these lives?
Um, I don't think their lives exactly would be saved, but I think they would have like chose a different option, like not with a gun. Um,
I mean, I know it's a sad topic to talk about, but the reason why it would make sense. The reason why people would probably choose to use a gun over anything else, like poisoning or cutting themselves, is because if you shoot yourself, it's instant death, and you don't have to
yeah,
go through the pain of dying through that process. And if you were to eliminate guns overall, you would probably see people second guessing their suicide, meaning that they're probably rethinking their lives and choosing, and most likely choosing not to commit suicide, than if they had the gun. Because if they had the gun, it was just instant, right? I have a gun, point it at my head, shoot it, and I would die. But if you take the guns out of the equation, they're given an opportunity to think about their lives and choose life over death.
yeah. I mean, it definitely could. I could. I get your argument that it may be like easier, but I feel even though it may save like one or 100 or like 1,000 people or something like that, I think we wouldn't really know ever. And I think that
No, I mean, we would definitely know, because if all of a sudden we have 50,000, sorry, if you have 36,000 suicides a year, and 61% are through suicide by gun, but then all of a sudden that 36,000 drops to 15,000 the next year or the year after, I mean, people will definitely know that, banning guns or removing them, or adding some sort of regulation definitely save those lives, right?
yeah, if there's a huge drop in it in gun deaths from suicide, I definitely could see that we notice, but I personally don't think that there would be enough of a difference to notice. I think, or
Oh, I
I
mean, I
think,
mean, you would definitely see a big difference, because 61% of all suicides are by gun, is what I'm trying to say. And if you're and if you do that, and you're able to convince the other, I mean, there are, I mean, this is sad, but there are obviously people who are extremely committed to ending their life, and it's sad, but there are always people like that. And if there's not the gun, they'll choose something else. I know it's a very sad topic, but you're able to save, even not, reduce it by 61%, but even reducing it by 20% or 10% or 40%, it's
uh,
still a huge difference.
I don't necessarily think it'd be reduced, but I mean, I'd say I'd actually like to, or possibly after this, I've never seen these stats, but look at countries who did ban guns and see how their suicide numbers were affected by it. Or
Hmm.
I think that'd be definitely interesting to look at. But I still think even like let's say or when you say in terms of the like suicide topic, what regulations are you like asking me, like you said, or at the beginning of the question, doesn't this make you want to put in like more gun laws or something?
Yeah.
What are you referring to specifically? Like banning pistols or like just putting in more background checks?
So banning guns is obviously the extreme, and that also works. But another thing that we touched on and talked about is education, right? Most of these people who are committing suicides, a lot of them teens, they actually don't have their own guns. They have their parents' guns, is what they use to
Yeah.
commit suicide, and allowing for more education to the parents, right? Which you agreed for. Things like that would make sure that parents lock their guns away in a place where it's not reachable or accessible by their children, allowing for these suicides, allowing for suicides and just gun deaths in general to take a drastic shift downwards.
Yeah, I mean, I'd hope that that would happen, you know, that they would go down a lot, but I'm just not. All right,
I'm not
and
really
I could
sold on the
kind of see
idea.
that. Yeah, I'm not really sold, or like I got your argument that like it's definitely could be an easier way for some people and maybe the most accessible way, but I don't think that. I mean, I think that the amount of people, a lot of them would still be able to buy guns, you know,
Uh huh.
even if we put in more regulations, because not all of them are already like diagnosed as like mentally crazy or something like
Sure.
that. So, or
and,
a
and,
lot of
and you
them
know
are kids.
one thing I want to touch on is that I agree with the fact that even if you have more regulations, you will find there will be people who will go out of their way to still get a gun, commit suicide,
Oh,
or do some sort of mass crime. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you have 50 people and they're all about to do something bad with a gun, but then you add these regulations and that it cuts down by half or 75%, or it drops down to 10, that's still a drop. Those are still lives
yeah,
saved,
that sounds like a
right?
large drop. Yeah,
I mean, those are still
yeah. I mean,
lives saved.
if if there was some kind of ban or something, and there's a drop that big, I could possibly be like down for it. But I'm not. I'd have to see that happening. But
Hmm.
I definitely see if there is a like very clear like correlation, I would possibly be like in favor of that, but I just haven't seen it, I guess.
America is an experiment of democracy. And as the country who started democracy, as a country who's continuing to experiment, don't you think experimenting on something like this would be beneficial to the whole population? Actually trying to pass these laws and see if there's an actual difference on a year to year basis. Don't you think that as a country who experimented with democracy, one of the greatest things in the world, should be experimenting with something like this?
Um no, I mean I think we already have 300 some like million guns in the US.
Yeah, we have a
And
lot.
even if we did put in regulations, I think people would still be able to get their hands on them. And I don't think that we'd be able to see like a noticeable impact right away. And
Hmm.
our I know in the UK in 1997 when they banned like semi-automatic weapons, which means like pistols and like assault weapons, which I think they may have already banned, but they
Hmm.
banned a lot of guns that year. But and they actually like bought them back and like
Yeah.
destroyed them. But
Hmm.
anyway, the next 5 years after that, their homicide rate went up. So I think sometimes experimenting it could take a while to even like notice a result, or we may never see a result because of just the way that the US is
And
in our
the thing with experiments is that it takes a while. Something. I mean, when we have in America, the stat is that for every 100 people, there are 101 guns. For a big
yeah.
country like America with over 300 million guns, it definitely you're not going to see change in a month's time, 6 months time, or in a year. Change happens over time, and I feel like giving these laws an opportunity, and and I know we differ on this, but giving these laws an opportunity and giving them time to adjust to our society and make sure it's integrated well into our society, people understand, and people have softened down from their anger of it. Maybe we can start to see some actual change. And with that, I would just like to ask you one last question, and that is, from everything we have discussed today, what are the core things that you want people to know about your point of view?
um Probably, I think that if someone really wants something, they'll be able to get it.
Mm-hmm.
So, or if they put their mind to it, no matter if it's like legal or illegal or, whatever,
Definitely.
I think they'll be able to get it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And thank you so much for coming on. And I just want to thank you for having such a productive conversation with me on gun control. It was really amazing to hear your perspective, and I'm glad that this isn't often we say this, but we're able to compromise and chat about things that we can do to make America an amazing country. We are all trying to we are the future of the country, and it's great to see that we are compromising and talking about these important subjects. So thank you so much for coming on.
yeah, thanks a lot for having me. It was pretty fun and I learned a lot. So,
Awesome. Thank you so much. And finally, I want to thank all the listeners for taking time out of their day to come on and listen and help bridge the political divide, because that's the whole goal. It's to bring people together from either side of the political spectrum to have discussions and make compromises on these important issues that affect our daily lives. Our next podcast will be next Monday, the 18th of May. So be sure to tune in for another awesome guest and a great discussion. Until then, thank you, and I'll see you all next week.